My name is Chris McCarthy, for those of you who do not know me, and I am the Executive Director here at the Provincetown Art Association Museum. And it is a pleasure to have all of you here tonight for the first of our series of lectures in our Freddie Schiff Levin lecture series. Tonight our talk is with Jim Bakker, Collector, Curator, and Vice President of PAAM, in conjunction with this wonderful exhibit, Art and Craft, Made in Provincetown, which is on view through June 23rd. And I know a number of you have gotten to see the show, but now you get the actual sneak peek into Jim's private life and private collection. Because I'll tell you some things. It all depends on what you're in. One of the most beautiful things about this show, aside from the actual pieces of art, is that many of them are already gifts to the permanent collection here at PAAM, and a number of them are going to soon to be new gifts to the permanent collection here at PAAM. For those of you who don't know about our collection, we have about 3,000 plus objects, and I'd say about 98.9% of those gifts have been gifted to PAAM. And so when you have a small museum and a limited acquisitions budget, people like Jim are the ones that sustain and make our collection great. And he sets a precedent. I hope that any of you who have wonderful Provincetown collections will listen to Mr. Bakker and follow suit, because the 100th anniversary of PAAM is in 2014, and part of one of our goals is to collect 100 exceptional pieces, and several of these will join that number. So for what Jim does for PAAM, I could stand here all night long and tell you, and I would be happy to do so, but I don't think all of you would want to sit in those uncomfortable chairs.
Thank you.
This exhibition actually opened on Jim's 60th birthday too, and we did that on purpose. And we're going to be celebrating all year long. In addition to this exhibition, Jim is also going to be one of our honorees at our annual gala this year on October 12th. Guess who's coming to dinner? Mr. Bakker. So make sure you get your tickets, because that is certainly going to sell out fast. Our next Freddie Schiff Levin lecture is at 7 p.m. on June 11th with the artist Elspeth Halverson, in conjunction with her exhibition in Intimate Cosmos, which actually opens to the public this Friday at 7 p.m. This lecture series was begun in 2003 to honor the artist Freddie Schiff Levin, who was a member of Provincetown's art community from the 1960s until her passing in 2002. PAAM gratefully acknowledges John and Tony Levin, who make this program possible with their generous support. We'd also like to thank Angel Foods, who continues to wow us with these cheese arrays. So please enjoy yourself with some refreshments afterward. So let's talk a little bit about Jim Bakker. Where do we start? Jim was the president of PAAM when I was hired in 2001. He basically hired me, I must say. We didn't have enough time to spend together because his term quickly ended, but he's remained on the board for my 13 years that I've been here. And he has done everything from the auctions to collections to crisis management to curating to just being one of my best friends. And you couldn't ask for more of that, because that wasn't in the job description, but thank you so much for having that in there. He's actually one of our best fundraisers too, because if you haven't been to one of our auctions, then you certainly don't know what you're missing. June 15th, 7 p.m. is our next auction, and you should all be there, because you can, this is actually, I'm going to attribute this to Lynn Stanley. It's a chance to take home your own piece of Provincetown heaven and see Jim in action. I like that. And now for Jim's official bio, because I'm going to get just being personal here. But Jim Bakker is the former executive director of the Pilgrim Monument in Provincetown Museum. Yes. He sits on the Town of Provincetown's Art Commission. He attended Harvard University, where he developed an interest in the fine arts. Mr. Bakker is vice president of the Provincetown Art Association Museum and a contributing author for numerous catalogs and magazines, but most recently, the New Britain Museum of American Art's exhibition, Tides of Provincetown, Pivotal Years in America's Oldest Continuous Art Colony. He's curated numerous exhibitions, has authored numerous articles for New England Art Antiques Journal, Provincetown Arts, and the American Art Review, among others. If you haven't visited his new shop, which is located right on the way to the Harbor Lounge, you go to the shop first, then you get a martini. That's how it works. Or get a martini, then go back to the shop. Please support Mr. Bakker, because he is the quintessential, unprecedented, most unbelievable supporter of this community in any way, shape, or form, and I won't take any other response than that for an answer. So without further ado, Mr. Bacher.
Hats off to you. The big cheese, and there's the little cheese here. Maybe there's some room for chairs in there if you'd like. It's kind of there's a chair over there, and maybe we can get one in over by the screen there. I want you to be able to see. Lynn Stanley warned me that there would probably be too many people here to do a gallery tour, so I came in here over the weekend and took some photos of the show, which I'd like to give you a brief overview on. So I'll let you kind of settle in wherever you can find a chair there, and I would start to tell you that you've heard the expression, "You are what you eat." Well, this collection is kind of who I am. So you have a reflection, both in the art of myself and what I do and what's important to me, from food, Facebook, art. And I wanted, as I decided to title the show Art and Craft, it's kind of a thin line that separated this over the centuries, actually, and what is accepted to be art and what is accepted to be craft, and where that crosses borders. And I know that we're probably not going to answer that today, but we'll probably have a little bit of a lively discussion about it, with how some of you feel. We can vote on it. I guess that what I'd like to do is give you like a brief kind of tour of the exhibition, and then we'll let you get out of your uncomfortable chairs and take a look around the other side, but we'll be able to see that from the screen. The collection is a living history of Provincetown, so it really includes paintings done over the last 100 years. Again, I didn't show some of the 19th century examples, but this Charles Hawthorne is perhaps the earliest example of what we have here today, probably painted around 1900 on the back shore. A classic example of Hawthorne's style from founding of the art colony in 1899 here with the Cape Cod School of Art. Soon thereafter, Edwin Ambrose Webster came and founded what was known as the modern school of painting. Of course, this example is not so modern, more reflective of his early studies at the Museum of Fine Arts when he first landed here and decided he would make this his home. It also is a reflection of the fact that I'm lucky enough to be the third owner of what was his house here in Provincetown up on Miller Hill, so it has special meaning to me, as does Hawthorne, that I look at his house when I'm taking a shower. Too much information. Again, Hawthorne had so many students that passed through here. This is one of the notable examples, I think, that of a woman that came here from Chicago, Dula Evans, to study with Hawthorne. It's a particular favorite in that mudhead sort of version of painting that has become exceedingly popular more recently than what people used to use for insulation. And of course, another aspect of my collection that I think is interesting and not perhaps unusual, but I had focused for many years on women painters. And of course, it's terrible now to think of women painters versus men painters, and now they're all just painters, but for so many times they kind of fell under the rug and behind the shadow. And this is certainly an exceptional example by Marion Campbell Hawthorne, Charles Hawthorne's wife. And she, in her own right, was a wonderful artist and has been shown here, in the past at the Art Association. And I hope at some point it will delve a little further into, her career as well. although she, manned the house and took care of the child, she devoted a certain amount of time every day to painting, and it certainly shows in this beautiful gouache. One of my favorites certainly is Oliver Chaffee. And this example particularly interesting to me that it was actually shown during the period at the Art Association when they had this major split from 1927 to 37 of the moderns versus the traditionalists. And again, I think a classic example of anything that was hardest to take off my walls, it was probably this picture which hangs over my fireplace that doesn't work in my living room. But again, flowers, shells. Flora Schofield, better known as a printmaker, who also came here from Chicago, again, I think kind of a classic example of modernism and, very daring women artists of the time period back in the teens and 20s. A new discovery, perhaps, is Evelyn Bourne. She lived down in Buzzards Bay, but from the late 20s until she passed away in the 50s, she showed here on a very regular basis at the Provincetown Art Association. And I think, one of those examples where this is a proposed gift to the collection of the Provincetown Art Association. She was a very close friend of Blanche Lazzell's and Dorothy Loeb, and I think that these women had a lot of fun back then. Again, in the early teens, Frank Carson painted this kind of extraordinary picture. I think he was teaching here until about 1918, 19, when basically he was more or less shunned by the town when it wasn't so fashionable to be gay. Wound up going to Boston, where he spent the rest of his life. This painting was shown here at the Art Association, and I had presented it years ago as a gift in honor of Raphael, Chet Solomon's partner, when he had passed away, and I'm very pleased that this is already in the collection of the Provincetown Art Association. Another surprise who exhibited here was Doris Lindo Lewis, aka Dolly Lewis, and kind of unusual and now kind of acclaimed as being one of the first women's surrealist paintings to show in this time period of the 20s. And certainly unusual whether she was the first or not, but recently she was included in the surreal show out at the LA County Museum, and next to Frida Kahlo and her other compatriots. Again, another proposed gift for this year to the collection. We're always anxious to fill gaps that we're missing or to improve on artists that we already have in the collection. Again, many of you may be familiar with Vernon Smith as an artist, but this is kind of a great example that it survived all these years, and particularly in my own house that it survived. It was done in 1930. Vernon Smith was in charge of the Work Progress Administration. He was the supervisor for all the artists, went around to check on what they were doing and reported back. This batik on silk, I think, is an extraordinary example of what may border into craft by an artist, and something again that we start to consider in a different light in the early 21st century. My favorite is probably this beautiful decorative box by Blanche Lazzell. It was made in 1920 and a gift to her sister Bessie. Again, there was an early color study print by Lazzell that this corresponded to, as well as an oil sketch. And this was shown at the Museum of Fine Arts in their show from Paris to Provincetown. At the same time that we decided here at the Art Association that we needed to have something, a Lazzell show. We didn't have a Lazzell, and as a result of that exhibition that we had of Lazzell and Loeb, women on the verge of modernism. We were gifted a Blanche Lazzell print, so everything kind of has little bits of connection to both the place where we live and the art that we love. You'll note when the lights come back on that a lot of these are the women painters, and we're kind of going around the room, but on this wall, again, a group of people that were very substantial in the history of Provincetown. Ada Gilmore, who later married Oliver Chaffee. Again, she was in Paris. You have this convergence of artists that no longer were safe to go to Europe. They were in Paris. Ada Gilmore had been here. She told her friends this was a great place to come. And they set up shop here, and a lot of the women got together and became what was known as the Provincetown Printers. She loved holidays, and so do we. And this is Thanksgiving, and it actually was in Blanche Lazzell's collection. Another, important woman from the period, this abstraction, monotype by Agnes Weinrich. Surprisingly, we don't have a lot of Weinrich in the collection, and this again a proposed gift for this year, this wonderful early abstraction. Dorothy Loeb, who I'd mentioned earlier about Loeb and Lazzell, here from the exhibition that year of the MFA show, and this again a proposed gift to the collection, fantasy watercolors from 1928, in kind of an incredible sense of modernism starting to shape up here in town. You may remember this design from the Secret Garden tours. Again, Florence Bradshaw Brown, an important early figure in the Provincetown Art Association, Mistress Mary, and again, one of the proposed gifts to the collection since it relates so closely to all those t-shirts we couldn't sell. Susan Flint was here, as it turns out, for Hawthorne's last teaching class in the summer of 1930, done in August. Provincetown painter, again you see the Art Association building in the background there from the boatyard across the street. It's kind of an interesting example. She actually had a sketchbook where she recorded all of the sketches that she did with Hawthorne. And her first sketch is a self-portrait of her in a Victorian bed, kind of collapsed, and it says "Jeune fille fatiguée." But she got out there and sketched every day and took some notes. And again, this interesting lithograph from 1930, another proposed gift to the collection. Speaking of the auctions, at one of the auctions we were sitting there and they were looking for an angel, and it seemed hard to imagine that this painting was going to drift through and out of the hands of the Art Association. So we decided then and there, Nappy Van Derrick sat there and he said, "I'll split it with you," and we wound up buying that for the collection, so it stayed here, but it's the original pen and ink study for the poster. Wonderful early Dickinson etching, again not so well known, for these etchings he did early on, but I liked the idea as a student organist and the lover of Bach, that in a upright piano, that I have a upright piano in my house, so they all kind of spoke to me. Even the little monument down here spoke to me once. Another student of Hawthorne, which recently came to our attention, was Jane Jarvis Mumford. She came here in 1915, and she was kind enough to sign her paintings and mark them Provincetown and date them for the year that she studied with Charles Hawthorne. So it gives us a little bit idea of what was going on. And again, like her painters previous and before and after, she liked the idea of the laundry out on the line. Again, a proposed gift for this year to the museum. From Kentucky, you see they came here from all over the place. This Maud Ainsley, kind of a wonderful painting. She basically settled up here above the hill where I formerly lived, next to my neighbor Elspeth Halverson. Hi, Elspeth. And again, she brought Mary Spencer Ney here, and the family of Mary Spencer Ney still has the house up above, and it's all kind of sentimental to me to have my neighbors involved. One of the artists, again, here is Angele Myrer, one of the Provincetown printers that studied with Carl Knaths and was a close friend of Ferol Warthen. She and Ferol had a shop over in 77-79 Commercial in the West End for many years together. They were very involved in resurrecting the white line print, which for those of you who may or may not be familiar with it, essentially, around 1916, Nordfeldt decided that, we could take some shortcuts and we could print with one block rather than multi-block like the Japanese were doing. And basically, you couldn't put all the colors on at once, but you could register back and forth on the wooden block. This print, or a version of this print, Dunes, was shown here in 1953 at the Provincetown Art Association. And she represents a gap to the collection, and this will also hopefully be accepted by the collections committee to be part of the permanent collection here. This is the example of fine photography by Jim Zimmerman, which Lynn was very sweet to substitute in my little fast PowerPoint that I worked all night on. And again, I think, a great print by Warthen. And you get this, again, thought of printmaking. Many thought of this as being a craft, but one thing that you need to note is that every print is unique. And we've recently seen correspondence with Blanche Lazzell at the suggestion of Ada Gilmore to write to the Society in Los Angeles, the printmakers, where they showed there, and kind of complaining about how they were segregated and persecuted, much like what was happening here, when the modernists thought they weren't getting their fair share. And they had specific size mounts that they were supposed to use, and Ada Gilmore wrote that that this was really caused them to submit inferior prints just to meet the specifications back then. So you get this whole chain here between Angele Myrer, Ferol Warthen, and then she in turn see how much better Jim's is? And a print by her granddaughter, Kathryn Lee Smith, who currently keeps the white line alive here in Provincetown. And I thought that this was kind of interesting to see the version from 1953 to 1993 of a different interpretation of the dunes. Again, Kathryn Lee Smith, as she goes by now, taught Barbara Stoughton and a whole chain of other painters, printmakers that are working in this medium. And this kind of a wonderful little example of a Christmas card with our beautiful museum there with the wreath. And again, a proposed gift to go back to the collection here at the Provincetown Art Association. Speaking of neighbors, my dear friend Tony Vevers, whom we shared driveway with for a long time, and I was so fortunate to get his take on art history and spend time with his family, with Elspeth and Tabitha and Stephanie. And I was fortunate enough to find this in Miami. And so it was kind of an exciting thing to bring back to Provincetown, 1959, major, I think, work that I love dearly. And more recently, speaking of the Art Association and the wonderful show that you'll see in the main gallery, Elspeth Halverson, and again, she's going to be speaking here coming up for the next Freddie Schiff-Levin lecture. I was able to purchase this in the 12 by 12 auction, which will be coming up. So it was kind of a nice little find to complete my family trio. And again, I loved it particularly because I'd be out in the garden and hear Elspeth hammering away up in her studio. And she certainly beat this fork. Above it, you'll see the wonderful work by her daughter, Silverside. Again, this wonderful example of great painting, but on a sea clam shell. And I think quite extraordinary, and you'll agree when you see it, I think. Again, Mary Spencer Ney, who was brought here by Maud Ainsley, you're starting to see some of the connection, and even a connection to me, of the horseshoe crab, which was something that Elspeth had featured in many of her works that I've seen exhibited over the years. And again, a reflection of where I am, who I am. Susan Pecora, a contemporary watercolorist of my garden gate looking down into Lovett's Court over the Meuse out to Long Point. Chet Jones, that I picked up that he had done of the studio where Webster worked. And again, something that you find at local galleries here. So Provincetown is an amazing source, from the galleries to the auctions to the charitable auctions to everything, to the members open here at PAAM. And it was exciting to me after a couple of cocktails to walk down to William Scott Gallery and see that Chet had titled this the Bacher House, like it was waiting for me. Not quite sure, but it's funny, whether it's the Webster House or the fact that it was built by Caleb Cook, the first owner that built it, a sea captain. It takes on the title of the person that lives there, but it takes a long time for something for change here in Provincetown, which is another thing that I find amusing and a reflection of some of the humor. Arthur Cohen recently passed away, but this I loved, portrait of his wife at an upright piano, not my upright piano, but none the same, that it reminded me of my house and of Arthur. One of the major works in the show that I had gifted previously by Bernard Simon, Man and Myth, 1943, kind of an extraordinary totem of cocobula wood, very dense, and I hope not responsible for Jim Zimmerman's hernia. But we did manage to get it out and on display again, and I think that you'll agree when you take a closer look. It's one of his major works, and we're so happy to have it here in the museum. Above it, a portrait by David Bethune Jameson, one of the African-American artists that came here and unfortunately passed away early on as a victim of the AIDS epidemic. Beautiful woodcut, self-portrait that again I think fills a gap and an interesting thing for the museum to have here in their collection. This was the first, I actually bought the first painting Jonathan Blum ever showed here in Provincetown years ago, and at one point early on, I tried to encourage many of the artists that were working and commissioned a portrait. And this is the study in monotype for the portrait. It's collaged with floral collage paper. And the oil is quite fascinating too, but I love this medium of monotype. It seems kind of foreshortened there, and you'll see one of the major works of William Littlefield, one of the artists that exhibited here for years and years and years. And essentially he also studied with Hoffman, but was critical of him in articles he had written, and basically kind of shunned and kind of disregarded by many of the other Hoffman students. Again, we had a retrospective here at the Provincetown Art Association, and this was gifted at that time to the museum, and I think a classic example of his work in the 50s. Jennifer Dottaccio, one of the artists that had an emerging artist exhibition here at the museum, and interesting use, which I guess from my background in the antiques, like the idea of the reuse of an old window and how she had worked this in, even with the fact that there were panes missing out of the window, and title Looking Back, which again I think is interesting, and from the early years of my involvement here at the museum, I found Jennifer to be a most interesting artist. She went on to Yale University to further study. Candy Jernigan, Approaching Twilight, again, an unusual example. Whether it borders on craft or what Candy Jernigan was up to, I don't know, but I liked the kind of My Way or the Highway. 1979, it was like right before she started collecting all of her things. Again, perhaps overshadowed or not by her husband, Dorothy Lake Gregory. I think, like kind of a very interesting art. I'd like to think that it was from a show here at the Art Association, and you see that the older woman who was kind of not interested, but the children were, and I think that it's kind of a testament of the whole thing of our young collectors, and how pleased I am that Lynn Stanley has really moved so much further with art outreach and the teaching going on in this institution. And I wanted to bring in objects, which, this was Jim Manning, and I didn't really realize it till I moved it away from my wall that it actually was signed and dated 1995. Again, with use of painted wood in objects found here and marked on the back as well, Provincetown. To its right, one of my favorite things that probably reflect some of my humor and my love for Susan Baker, the Great Motherwell Art Heist. The small but poignant piece that the robbers missed taking all the way to the bank. Again, it was one of the illustrations from her book History of Provincetown, and I had bought that when they had the show at the Fine Arts Work Center. Again, I had a lot of monumental pieces. Art or craft, not quite sure. And this was, you probably have known him best, probably for those of you that live here, for his signs, the Spiritus Pizza Shop. Again, Girls' Night In, more monumental. My beautiful little Resica Baroque sketch of Jim and the Monument. reaching, but out of my reach. Another one of the 12 by 12s, which I guess I had to buy to keep it off the market. It's not a very flattering picture, but two of my favorite people in the thing as well, though, with Nappy here studying his catalog down on the left, equally unflattering of him, and one of the auctions. And soon, well, soon, not tonight, you'll see a preview of what we have coming up in June. Another 12 by 12 that I find particularly endearing is our poor Ellie that passed away, but with the Board of Selectmen and what the different things going on there with Mary Jo and Austin and Pam Parmakian and Michelle Couture and our town manager. And this again, you know, a wonderful piece of furniture that you get a chance to look at closer, but by Nancy Whorf, who again followed and worked with Peter Hunt and had her own unique style as well, and, you know, in the use of shapes and objects, and you know, again, you get some of these designs that you'd find, you know, on English or other ceramics of the 18th, 19th century, the hearts and the roses. You know, it appealed to my decorative heart. There you can see a little bit of the close of some of the paint. But again, you know, we think of Nancy Whorf now as a wonderful, great painter, and yet this was like you know, an important aspect of her life and career, I believe. I wanted to include some textiles in my selection of 60. P.S. It was 60 pieces, which was, you may think that would be easy to do, but I had to whittle this down to basically only include one piece by each artist, and even then it was a lot of tough decision making. This was Bertha Ried. She again did woodcuts and ceramics and paint. But I find it particularly interesting of, you know, stencil on fabric, and again it appealed to the side of me that loved arts and crafts movement, the furniture associated with it, and this table scarf I think is kind of a wonderful example that I had purchased from her daughter. At one of the sculptural invitationals in Juried Show, it was one of my favorite pieces by Hugo Porcaro, again probably considered by some to be outsider art or folk art, but I love his humor. I love the whole idea. I once put it out in front of my gate to see whether I could get any extra money to help with the mortgage. And again, please help save my soul, donate. And, oh, your pocket change here, give, thank you. Oh, thank you for the booze money.
How much did you collect?
Well, there was some money in it when I bought it. And I think I got another $1 or $2. It's hard, it doesn't easily extract. I gotta get a magnet. Again, you know, the influence of Peter Hunt, this early Peter Hunt, one of a pair that were on each side of his bed in his home, you know, reflects to me that idea of Thanksgiving, again tying back in with the Ada Gilmore and holidays and my love for food. Tom McCanna, the Art Association Bank, which unfortunately all of my money has gone to Chris. There's nothing in the bank. So she'll have to settle for the art in a little money. One of the galas, again, there are always these great table decorations by the artists that, and this one I purchased here because I like the idea of bidding, and on the back there's you know, a wonderful kind of stamped envelope, and it actually stands in that little stand, and it's a nice souvenir for me of what's become one of the great events, I think, of the season here. Ray Nolan, I think, you know, another great artist working here in Provincetown currently. This beautiful cigar box I purchased at a competitor's auction for a fair amount of money beyond what I found out that they sold for down at the liquor store. But Paul Ressica told me this was the best one, and that he had seen several. And it reminded me of a story that Nappy always told at the auction, that they were bidding and bidding away, and they were the only two bidding. And Ressica said, "Oh, do you have to have this one?" He said, "Don't you have to have everything?" And he says, "No, I just have to have this one." Again, one of the table decorations, one of the auctions here at the gala, this beautiful Bugsy Bogosian hand, and his use of the artist model with the domino, which, for my love of works by Pasquale Natali, I like the dominoes, I like playing dominoes. It all has a significance to me and not necessarily you, but I think it's a great object that kind of reflects, and I can move the fingers around at home. Polly Burnell, again, I think a great artist working here. This one, an early ceramic called fisticuffs, and of course you can't really see it here, but you'll see it like later when you go into the show there. Is my laser still? That this one is a particularly hirsute male, which I always associate with my partner Russell. Although I think he's more knocking me than my knocking the hat off him. But it just has this wonderful detail, and I think that again, she has a great sense of humor within her works in different mediums. This was an interesting example by Jackson Lambert that many of you will probably remember, his wonderful cartoons and his great sense of humor with Ralph and Madge. And it was from the early years at the Art Association, when Robin Watson was still here, that she told artists to go out and paint something on furniture or whatever, and this seemed perfect for me, a bar. And even though at the time I wasn't that crazy about martinis, I certainly slowly became more interested in them, in the idea, in the idea of time lost. And again, it was a great reason to get it out of the corner in my house and clean it off a little bit. The olive, the glass, not the Pilgrim's Progress, but the Rake's Progress. And I had never really realized it. I'm going to go back here. That the good thing about circulating and getting things out of the house is that I actually realized that, I never thought it was signed, but we discovered, it is signed, which was nice. Again, his use of the humor, with not using the piece of Chippendale hardware in the top section for the dog's eyes. And the interior for the bottles was actually kind of sacrilegiously cut from an Aphon portrait of Jack. And of course he left a couple of Ralph's Bar coasters in there for me. Again, interesting artist books. Another thing, is it craft? Is it, I've seen, correspondence, with Ada Gilmore talking about different printers working, and now they have, of course, a studio in France, but they had done this beautiful book with 11 different woodcuts, and all marked about who designed and printed them on the interior, which unfortunately you won't be able to see that, but a great example, their chop or bookmark, and I like particularly how it tied in with this ostrich egg by Paul Weirhun, aka the Eggman, that I started liking way back when he showed at the Schoolhouse Gallery. This one with the map of Cape Cod, I think particularly interesting, and again reflective of the white line print. You can see, the wonderful motion and involved with the egg and the shape of the egg in the design. And again, one of my favorites, Lynn Stanley, Flowers Too Beautiful for You. No, and they each, which you'll see, have some Too Sweet or Too Beautiful for You, Cranky, but they're the most beautiful little watercolors. And again, this small collection that I have of artist books. The sculpture by Gustl Morton, who had showed down here, had a sold-out show in Truro years ago. This is, she was one of the nonagenarians that I first met at the referral of Claire Sprague in Boston while she was still alive. She was my first living artist, and I guess that was a bad sign because she was deceased by the time we showed her. One of the rare examples of the Provincetown printers, Juliet Nichols. This was the block for an exhibition poster. Again, I think kind of interesting in terms of objects. And that's kind of it on that part of it. And I guess that we could talk a little bit more, if any of you have any questions or thoughts about art versus craft and how you see it fitting in. I clearly like the idea that it's all one thing and that it's not necessarily art or craft, because so many of them were crafted by artists. And I don't think we'll answer it, but I think that I wanted to bring this show in the manner that I have to the Art Association to ask the question, that will sooner or later come before the collections committee, whether, we're going to consider having objects as part of the permanent collection. It's obviously not an easy storage factor in terms of furniture, but in terms of objects, is it something that we should be looking at, of the future of the museum and how we're going to portray Provincetown, in particular, to the world. It's all kind of debatable, and in the meantime, I'm happy to enjoy pieces of that nature at home until we figure it all out. But I'm hoping that there is some sort of future to that, and our thoughts about bringing that forward, into the collection. Marla.
We need another building.
We need another building. We'll get the checkbook out. Well, we're certainly hoping that. Bob?
Jim, years ago, James and I had a friend who was a painter, and we wanted to buy a work of his. It was kind of a large painting. And we were trying to make up our mind, and he said, well, why don't you take it and live with it for a while and then decide? And we actually decided not to buy it because living with it revealed it to us in a different way. And I think what's so wonderful about this work and the way you speak about it is that you live with all this stuff, and I think that's incredibly important. You go to museums or galleries and you see work, but it's when you are showering or looking out the window or whatever, where you pass it and you even see it peripherally day after day, that it becomes so alive and part of you. And I think you communicate that so clearly, and it's really a gift to all of us in the museum, certainly.
Well, it's a great thing, as I mentioned before, the idea of sharing, and it gives, the collector a chance to sit and rediscover pieces that you've forgotten about. It's exciting for me, and I certainly see things in a different light when I see them in this beautiful gallery here at the museum, and it makes me very proud that I was a part of helping to make this happen here, and how we can continue to make it happen here, particularly as we go forward into this centennial year. I hope that others follow suit, or that if you have something that's wonderful that we should be borrowing for a Pioneer show or some of the great exhibitions that are going to be coming up this year, that you'll think about loaning it to us. And the thing is that, well, Chris will probably never give it back to you, but But it does, you know, like you are what you eat and what you collect, and it's all interrelated to, you know, your own personal joy, but I think that there's a lot of joy that, you know, we all share in it, and a lot of it does have to do with how we live and where we live. In, you know, in my previous house here in Provincetown, it was kind of constrained, and I have a little more space, and as you know, when you have more space, you tend to fill it up. And, you know, the good news for Chris back then was that, the little field was too big to get in my door, and I had no place to put the big sculpture. But they do create problems here, you know, at the museum in terms of, you know, thinking about that, and we think about, you know, that, unless it's a big Rothko. And we could, just speaking of one of the gaps in the collection, I didn't have one of those, although I kept thinking, wouldn't we find one in the attic of Rothko's house? But alas, just a rocking chair. But anyhow, I hope that you all enjoy the show, and, you know, if you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to get out of those chairs now and take a walk around, have some of the cheese and wine and anything else that you want. But I guess before I conclude, and thank you all for coming tonight. It's really great to see you all here. Whether you have any other questions or thoughts that you wanted to share before we kind of break apart. Hearing none. So.